Hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 128, and this is going to be part 2 of the FBI, also known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So let's go ahead and get started on this puppy here. So a little bit about their budget. They do have a rather large budget. I think it's too large, me personally. But I look at things from an accountant/auditor point of view, and I also am a Republican capitalist because I believe in capitalism. And then I also believe that we need to focus on the original intent of our Constitution of the United States. Meaning, I think we have way too much money being spent by the federal government, and sometimes with departments that are very much important, like the FBI, sometimes they overspend. And I think the reason why, my personal opinion, the reason why they overspend is because they get the wrong kind of people in management. That can happen. Because it's one of those things like a little kid in a candy store. If they're spending someone else's money, which would be their parents' money, then it doesn't mean as much to them as if it was their own money. You know, let's say, for example, their allowance that they earned by mowing the lawn or doing the dishes, that kind of thing. So these budgets that are paid, or these monies that are paid for the budget of these different federal agencies are all paid by federal tax dollars, meaning monies that are taken out of our paychecks to pay our taxes, which we should all pay. I agree with taxation. I just wish it was a lower rate because that would help our currency be stronger and more people would have more money to spend. And technically, whenever the tax rates are lower, the federal government as well as state governments and sales tax situations as well, they tend to bring in even more money because more people have more money to spend. So it's kind of one of those things that you have to pay attention to where the money is going and give people a chance to earn a living. You can still tax them, but give them a chance to earn a living. Now, I'm going to talk just a pinch about the budget here, and these are monies that basically every federal agency goes to the Congress because Congress has the power of the purse, and that's a phrase that means that Congress decides what gets done with tax dollars for the most part, okay? So that's what it means by Congress has the power of the purse. They control the monies, not necessarily the Treasury, but although they do work hand in hand. But in terms of federal agencies requesting monies, it comes from the Congress. They decide to approve or disapprove or deny their budget request. So for the fiscal year of 2019, the Bureau, they were approved for a budget of $9.6 billion. So that's billion with a B, and it's very close to $10 billion. So again, what we see here is that federal agencies as well as state agencies, they are notorious for always asking for more money, never less money. So that's an issue there. Going on, it says, in the authorization and budget request to Congress, so again, Congress has the power of the purse, for fiscal year of 2021, the FBI asked for $9,800,700. I take that back. $9,800,724,000. Of that money, $9,748,000. Let me rephrase this. This is hard to say because you got billion and million. Of that money, $9,748,829,000 was used for salaries and expenses. That's why I think their budget is way too high. They're spending way too much money because they only have like a little over 30,000 employees. That's a lot of money for people to be spending. Then it says that $51,895,000 was used for construction. That is an issue for me as well, and here's why. The federal government has, there's a story that came out several years ago, I'll see if I can't find it, that the federal government owns, rents, or leases all these vacant buildings all across the United States, and they're not using them. So it's a waste of money. What the federal government should do is if they own these buildings and they are not using them, they need to reallocate them. Meaning if another agency within the federal government needs a new building, look at the buildings that we already have that are owned by the federal government. If they're not needed, sell them off. If we have buildings that we are renting or leasing from like a private individual or a company or corporation, we need to stop doing that if it's vacant. We're wasting money. The federal government is notorious for wasting money on real estate. We should not be doing that. So I think there's a lot that gets lost in the paper trail and it gets lost by bad managers. So I don't think that this is a reflection of the entire federal government being horrible, because it's not. There are good people that work in the federal government. I think the majority of federal workers do a really good job. Otherwise, we would not have, such a strong, stable country in terms of the federal agencies that we have, because the United States I would say the United States is one of the safest countries on the planet. And we have our federal government to thank for that. So I think there are many good people that work for the federal government. However, that doesn't mean all of them are good. And I think a lot of it comes down to bad management. And the reason why I think that is because there are several federal agencies that are notorious for not firing bad people. They are notorious for promoting people that they don't want in their department. It's kind of like in the military. We discussed this in another podcast where it's very common in the military where if you don't like someone that's in your group or whatever, within your federal job, within the military or whatever, you just promote them to a different rank in a different department so that way you don't have to deal with them. Well, that's really stupid because all that did was reward bad behavior. Well, unfortunately, that very much happens in state agencies and federal agencies, and that's why there's such an issue with bureaucracy. So that's how a bureaucracy functions. It doesn't do what's right. It just keeps promoting bad people because they don't want to deal with them. Well, here's the thing. In the private sector, we fire people we don't like. We fire people that make mistakes like that and continuous mistakes. We fire people that are not a team player. And normally I don't like that term, team player, but here's the thing. You have to get people that are like-minded and that are like-minded for the good, for the common good. I've worked for employers where I was not like-minded and I was not really considered a team player in some jobs I've had, and they did not work out for good reason because I didn't think the way that they did. I did not behave the way that certain people did. And I have morals and values, and I was not going to settle for less than God's best, and I was not going to sell out my integrity. So there are two different types of team players, okay? And also, I guess technically two types of employees. You have bad team players, you have good team players. But it's really, what does the team want you to do? Is the team asking you to do something ethical, or are they asking you to do something unethical? Most of the jobs that I've had that were bad were sales jobs because they were always trying to get you to do something that was unlawful or illegal or unethical or just unprofessional. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Because all they were wanting was money from a customer. I'm like, look, you will get the money from the customer, but you need to do it right. You need to build trust and rapport, and you can't do that with the foundation of lies. It's the same thing in any other job. If you have a employer, for example, in insurance, life insurance industries, which, I was a insurance agent for 3 years, and I just recently stopped being one. I didn't want to be in that industry anymore. Because it really bothered me, the things that I saw in there, and it was always like sell, 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 sell. And it's like, the product will sell itself if you're just honest and genuine, but it was like no matter how much you sell or no matter how much you do, it's never enough. Well, sales jobs are notorious for being corrupt and crooked, such as like at a car dealership kind of situation. So, bureaucracies very much operate the same way. It's just not dealing with sales. It's not dealing with profits. It's dealing with, it's almost like a boys' club, kind of like a frat house. And that's how some of these agencies and these bureaucracies behave, even though there may be women that have, jobs in that agency or something, but that's the problem with bureaucracy. It doesn't get rid of the bad people. It doesn't shoo them away. It keeps them, and then that entire agency or department can be ruined by these people that do not have the proper ethical code or moral standard to be in that position. And unfortunately, when you get bad people in the public sector, which would be federal jobs and state jobs, it really matters there. I mean, it matters all across the board, but when you're dealing with government jobs, that's very serious. Working for the FBI is not the same as selling a cell phone at like a T-Mobile store. Are both jobs important? Yes. Should a person be good and ethical at both? Yes. But there's a difference between who you're working for and what your job responsibility is. There's more responsibility required and also a higher rate of character and high morals and values when you work for the FBI as opposed to selling a cell phone. Now, mind you, I've met people that were crooks that sold cell phones at T-Mobile stores. So, of course, employers want the cream of the crop. Of course, they want these good, wonderful, kind people. They want people that have morals, ethics, and values. But I'm just saying that it really matters who you work for, and it matters who hires and fires those people. So it's one of those things, like I remember when I worked for a car dealership back in the day, these guys that got promoted to being car sales manager of a department, whether it's new cars or used cars or finance, which would be F&I department, if you got a bad manager in charge of one of those departments, the only kind of people they hired were usually men that were ex-cons and that did drugs, like methamphetamine, not necessarily coke, but especially marijuana. They hire who would be most loyal to them and look the other way if something were to happen. That's the problem. That's why I think that this budget is so high and ridiculous because of bad management. And bad managers are not just way up at the top. Wherever there's management, there can be a bad manager, and that could be like an assistant manager, like at the lower end, whatever the case may be, because they tend to promote their own. You know what I mean? Like people that think the same way as them. So just know that even though every agency has its issues, just like every company has its issues, there is still a responsibility, whether you work in the public sector or the private sector, to do what's right and only promote people that should be promoted. It shouldn't be tick for tack. It shouldn't be, hey, that's my bro, or hey, that's my girl, or whatever the case may be. It needs to be for the right reason. My personal opinion is that if you know someone personally and they are like a close friend, you should not promote them. Even if they deserve it, I think it's a conflict of interest to promote someone, especially because you know them. See, that's why so many employers want to know, do you know anyone that works at this company? Do you have any family that works here? Because the reason why they're asking those questions on these employment applications is because they want to know, is there a chance of nepotism? They want to know, is there a chance of favoritism? Because that is an issue. So that's why I mention this stuff. So just FYI, be aware of that. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about their history. In terms of background, it says that in 1896, so this goes back quite a ways, really interesting, I did not know this, the National Bureau of Criminal Identification was founded, which provided agencies across the country with information to identify known criminals. The 1901 assassination of President William McKinley created a perception that the United States was under threat from anarchists. Now, whoever wrote that stupid statement is a moron and a big moron and an idiot, because it's not a perception, it's an actual fact. So, the United States, what we need to remember is that we have anarchists here in the United States. They're a dime a dozen, and they're not loyal to the United States. They're loyal to whoever promises them power, is basically what it is. And anarchists, I think, were a bigger problem around the turn of the century when this was going on, with the assassination of President William McKinley, because one thing that we know is that a lot of the trade organizations and labor unions that we have discussed in times past were founded by anarchists. Most of these anarchists immigrated over here to the United States, either from I don't think it was called the Soviet Union yet, but it was from the Russian Empire, which the Russian Empire was basically dethroned by anarchists within their own country, and they assassinated their Tsar, which was Tsar Nicholas, his wife, and all their children. They brutally murdered the Tsar and his entire family. And so they replaced their monarchy with basically communism. And so if you want to read up on that, we probably will discuss Lenin, but there were a lot of people that sided with Lenin because he made all these promises that, oh, you're the worker, you're constantly discriminated against. That's not true. Did Russia have it hard? Yes. But Russia is a really large country. It's not all 100% fertile soil. And, Russia was predominantly farming. So it's one of those things that you have someone like Lenin and other communists that just wanted communism and they hated religion, but yet they say they hated banks and money systems, but yet they love money. That's communism. So what they would do, these anarchists, especially Lenin and these communists, They would convince people that did not have much that the reason why they don't have much is because the church is stealing from them, the rich are stealing from them, the clergy are stealing from them, and it's like, that's not true. Although I don't particularly trust the church. When I say the church, I mean the Catholic Church, because I've seen things myself, because I'm no longer Catholic, because of the things I've gone through. But here's the thing. I know that the entire Catholic Church is not entirely evil. It's certain people that are evil that need to be kicked out of the Catholic Church. Now, mind you, the Catholic Church is a little bit of a cult. It says it's based on the writings of the Holy Word of God, but it has warped it and disrupted God's holy word, and it's not really practicing the true faith. So that's one reason why you have Lenin and anarchists and communists that are definitely pointing the finger at an easy target, and that's the Catholic Church. And the reason why they were an easy target back then was because there is a huge problem in the priesthood. And the priests had access to a lot of money. So, needless to say, it was easy to convince people that, hey, the church is the problem. Then the communists and anarchists point the finger at the rich, and they're like, look, they have all this money and they're taking it from you. That's not true. The rich earn a living by having a business. They make money. So they're saying that they're stealing from the poor. No, they're not. They're actually making a living, and they're earning a living, and they're employing hundreds, if not thousands of people. But see, here's the thing. Whenever you have a indoctrination like communism spread like wildfire and take over countries, basically, it's very easy to convince people that are poor or that want more that everybody's against you. Everybody else is the problem. You're not the problem. And I'm not saying that people that don't have a lot of money are the problem. I'm saying that you can't blame everybody else for your circumstances. I'm saying at some point you need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, be an adult, and handle your life, handle your situation, even if it sucks. Because even if something sucks, you still have a responsibility to be an adult and to make good, wise decisions. You know, bumping off your czar and brutally murdering his entire family is not kind. It's murder. And that's not caring about somebody else's life. It's taking a life. Taking over an entire banking system, which is what communists do and what anarchists do, that's not good or kind. They gave themselves permission to steal everybody else's money. You know, it's kind of like the Robin Hood syndrome. Oh, we're going to steal from the rich to give to the poor. Well, guess what? A thief is a thief. A thief is a thief, and thievery is thievery. Like, you cannot give yourself permission to break the law. That is exactly what anarchists were doing. And this happened around the turn of the century, big time. So a lot of these anarchists came over from Russia, aka the Soviet Union, and also the UK, as well as Ireland. Just because people came over here as immigrants and they're from Europe, that doesn't mean they are these sweet little innocent people. Because there are quite a few labor unions and trade unions that were founded by anarchists that immigrated over here to the United States. And some of them bombed people and murdered people. And sometimes they murdered people within other unions just so they could get their contract. So just be aware, there are anarchists in our country today. I don't think they're as bad as way back then, though. My personal opinion, I could be wrong, because again, I don't work for the police. I don't work in the FBI. I don't have the information, don't want that information. I'm just saying that from a historical point of view, there was way more anarchist threats back then around the turn of the century than there are today. What we have going on today is liberalism that's a threat, socialism that's a threat, and terrorists that are a threat. Now, terrorists are nothing new. Terrorism has been going on for thousands of years. It's just different groups and different populations that were the terrorists. So, it's not just Muslims that have been terrorists, although they predominantly tend to be the biggest problem today. But it's one of those things that, crime isn't new and crime doesn't pay, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, anyway, moving on, I want to make that point there. It says the Departments of Justice and Labor had been keeping records on anarchists for years, but President Theodore Roosevelt wanted more power to monitor them. Theodore Roosevelt was a very smart man, and I don't think he's given enough credit for all the good that he did for the United States. I really do not. But he was very smart in wanting to monitor these anarchists because he knew they could be a very serious problem to the safety, health, and security of the United States. And this is before the FBI was founded. So just think about that. Every federal agency had to start somewhere. But every federal agency, there were people that were thinking in that direction before an agency was created. So there were people that were concerned about XYZ factor and they're like, hey, we need to keep this on our radar for XYZ reasons, so to speak. So a very smart man, very sharp. So then we move on to the creation of the BOI. So the Bureau of Investigation, also known as BOI, and mind you, the FBI, they had several different names throughout their history. And the reason why, again, is because their name changes as their department grows, especially to becoming a more productive federal agency because they're growing in their responsibility, okay? So it says the Bureau of Investigation, also known as the BOI, was created on July 26, 1908. Let's see here, the Bureau's first official task was visiting and making surveys of the houses of prostitution in preparation for enforcing the White Slave Traffic Act, or Mann Act, passed on June 25, 1910. Then later on in 1932, the Bureau was renamed the United States Bureau of Investigation. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about prostitution, the White Slave Traffic Act, and what's going on today. So what I find very disturbing is that we know that prostitution is supposed to be illegal in the United States, okay? They passed a law way back in 1910 banning prostitution, making it illegal because prostitution is a form of a white slave traffic industry. And it always affects women and children way worse because they tend to be easy targets, easy victims. And it's really horrible what they do to women and children within the realm of prostitution and sex trafficking. It's very grotesque. Well, this was an issue in the United States even around the turn of the century. Excuse me. Let me get a drink of water. The air is still very thick here in Oklahoma. It basically is humid because it wants to rain, but it has not rained really very much. Okay, so anyway, what really bugs me about this is that we know that prostitution is supposed to be illegal in the United States, but yet it is legal in different counties in Nevada. Also, we do have a sex trade industry in the United States. It's called pornography. We have these porn stars. And, let me say this. If someone's a porn star, they're not a star. They're just being used for their body, and their dignity, their chastity has been stolen from them. And that's horrible. And we have that going on here in the United States. So what's really disturbing to me is that, the FBI was trying to fight prostitution way back around the turn of the century because here's the thing. We had a problem with kidnappings. We had a problem with rapes. We had problems with the sex trade. And also, whenever you have prostitution like this, you have high crime rates, you have very high drug rates, meaning like there's infiltration of drugs, marijuana, cocaine, whatever the case may be. It's very much connected to prostitution. Another problem they were having during this time, and this is nothing new, but it does happen, there's a spike in sexually transmitted diseases, which around this time, I would say one of the biggest issues was syphilis. Now, what you have to remember is back then, and we have discussed this before, but I think it's worth repeating, syphilis is a bacterial infection. Back in, during this time, they did not have antibiotics. Antibiotics did not come about until the 1940s. So needless to say, before antibiotics were invented, if you contracted a sexually transmitted disease that was bacterial, you were stuck with it. You were not cured of it. So with syphilis, you either your brain was eventually destroyed because that's what syphilis does. It attacks the brain in different parts of the body. You also lose your hair, so you end up going bald. It affects your central nervous system as well as your peripheral nervous system. The only hope that you had with syphilis was either be healed by God, which can happen and does happen, to receive your miracle from your Heavenly Father, or you're just hoping and praying that the syphilis goes dormant. It just stays in your bloodstream, but it doesn't destroy your body. That's how some people spread syphilis and other diseases without realizing it, because they don't realize they have it, because it's almost like herpes or something. Although herpes is viral, there's some diseases, it lays dormant for a long period of time and sometimes never reactivates itself. But for the most part, these viruses and bacterium are very much active in someone's bloodstream once they contract it. So even though we did not have a big, powerful CDC back then around the turn of the century, they were very much aware of sexually transmitted diseases. Another thing that concerns me is that, the sex trade and trafficking is supposed to be considered illegal. Prostitution is supposed to be illegal, but yet within the LGBTQ community, homosexual men are trying to lower the age of consent for sex with little boys, meaning minors, meaning little boys that have not reached puberty yet, or they are not completely grown up yet. Little boys do not hit puberty until after little girls, so they hit it later. And also, the frontal lobe of children in the brain, both in males and females, is typically not fully developed until age 25. So what's very disturbing to me is that you have homosexual men, grown homosexual men, meaning they are adults. They want to be able to have sex with underage children, especially little boys. Now here's the thing. If it's wrong for a 40-year-old man to want to have sex with a 12-year-old girl, why are we allowing or even thinking that it's okay to let the LGBTQ community change our rules, laws, and regulations to give homosexual men, grown men, permission to have sex with children, little boys? See, here's the problem with that. If the LGBTQ community gets that law changed, whether federal, state, or local, whatever the case may be, it's going to be very difficult for law enforcement of any agency, where it's FBI, police, sheriff. It's also going to be very difficult for prosecutors in the court systems to go after pedophiles, registered sex offenders, and anyone that rapes a child. Because if you change that law, they can just lie and say it was consensual. And even if the child says it was consensual, the child could be very, very well be mentally tortured by what happened to them. They may be too scared to say what happened, or they might be siding with their perpetrator. They might be siding with their oppressor, which sometimes happens with victims. Sometimes they're so mentally distraught, the way that they avoid recognizing or realizing they were violated is to side with their oppressor, because it would just bring them more pain to admit to what happened to them. See, that's what people don't understand with the LGBTQ, XYZ, whatever they call themselves, community. They want to lower the age of consent for homosexual men. If it's not appropriate for a grown man to want to have sex with a child that's a girl, then why are we even thinking about allowing homosexual men to have access to little boys? These are children, these are minors. So you have grown men that are targeting minors. They're typically in grade school or middle school. That's the age bracket that these homosexual men want to go after. Another problem with this is that if the LGBTQ XYZ community is successful at changing these laws in regards to sexual consent, then how can law enforcement go after homosexual priests that have sodomized altar boys? See, what homosexual men want to do, whether they are Catholic or not, whether they are priests or not, they don't want to be held responsible for their sexual perversions, I guess you could say. They want to be able to do whatever they want whenever they want. So they're willing to change the law of the land to fit their lust and their sexual desire, and they don't care who it violates and who it harms. that goes completely against what the United States stands for. It goes against everything within our laws and our bylaws and our legislation. So if these laws are changed by a very small segment of our population that affects everybody, affects the many, then we are literally binding the hands of our law enforcement, which includes policemen, FBI, sheriffs. We're also binding the hands of the prosecutors. And we're also binding the hands of judges to where they cannot arrest, interrogate, take to trial, or imprison sexual predators. That is not very smart. I mean, the FBI alone has been trying to fight off sexual predators within the United States going back to the turn of the century. It seems to me that the LGBTQXYZ community, they've been taking over a lot of stuff and then claiming to care about people, claiming to love people. Well, if you love someone, you're not going to sexually violate them. And you're not going to be looking at their children as a sex object, which is what homosexual men do with little boys. That is a big problem. It's a big problem. And, I'll give an example of where the LGBTQ community has taken over something. They've taken over the month of June. It's horrible. I can't stand the month of June now that they've taken it over. Like, it just is like gay pride everywhere, gay pride everywhere. It's just like, there's a lot that's not right about their agendas. Because it destroys the human family. The human family is between one man, one woman, and the sacrament of marriage and the children that they have. It is not two men or two women. That's not a marriage. That's not a family, because you cannot biologically or anatomically or naturally have a family if you have two men having sex or two women having sex. You have to have an egg and a sperm. And it's like that all over the planet, whether you're dealing with people, plants, insects, animals. That's procreation. But they're trying to change how everything is viewed to fit their agenda. And it's like, you know what? Heterosexuals have really missed the mark in terms of calling people out on their disturbing sexual behavior, because this disturbing sexual behavior is affecting everything else in our society. And now they're trying to change our laws. I knew this was going to happen because I knew when homosexual couples were allowed to adopt children, I thought that is very scary. Because now they've got children in their home that don't belong to them, but they're changing how they think. And they're getting all these kids to side with them. And their side is wrong. I'll give another example. Pizza Hut, which is a pizza company, got called out either this last June or June of last year because they allowed a transgender drag queen kind of book to be in the Book It program, and they were encouraging kids to read it. They were encouraging parents to read these transgender kind of sexualistic books to their children. It was either about a kid that's wanting to become a drag queen or an adult that's transitioning to a drag queen. I can't remember exactly what it was because I didn't read it, don't care to, because that disgusts me. But parents were furious about this. Because here you have the LGBTQ community ruining what's called the Book It program. For those who don't know what the Book It program is, I remember this program. I loved it. It came out in the 80s because I'm an 80s baby. And so what it was, Pizza Hut was trying to encourage the kids to read and make it fun. And it was actually a really ingenious plan. It worked. I loved reading so I could get a free pizza. It was great. So every time you read a book, your teacher would give you a sticker, and that sticker would go on your pin or your button, and it was a Book It program button that you wore into your local Pizza Hut, and you showed the waiter or waitress your button. And if you had all the stickers on there for the week or whatever because you read so many books, then you got a free personal pan pizza. Well, now the LGBTQ community has infiltrated the Book It program for children, for minors that are in grade school, and is trying to push their sexual agenda onto little children via children's books, via the Book It program within Pizza Hut. And Pizza Hut is in the private sector. It's a privately owned company, but yet they are being overtaken by the LGBTQ community agenda. See, one of the reasons why the LGBTQ community is going after children is because they are indoctrinating them. So not only are they trying to change our rules, laws, and legislations, they're trying to indoctrinate your children to convince them that their lifestyle is just as appropriate or equal to a heterosexual when it is not. See, I don't think people realize that, we have a lot of prisons in the United States, especially in Oklahoma. We have a very high incarceration rate. But, we do have guys in prison that have raped children. They have raped toddlers. And they call it pornography. That's why, these laws that go after prostitution and child sex trafficking and child pornography are very much important. See, I'm not fooled by the LGBTQ community's agenda, because if they're trying to make it so that they can have so-called consensual sex with minors, that's not right. They totally lost me whenever they're trying to go after children. Because that's grotesque. See, they're trying to steal the innocence and the chastity of minors. That used to be a no-no. That used to be really grotesque to do that. But now you have a small segment of the population. Homosexuals are not a large part of the community. They are not a large part of the population, technically. So why are we pandering to people that, first of all, are not the majority, and number two, do not have the best interest of the United States in mind, and they want to go after your children? We should not be promoting their causes at all. Now let me say this. I am against discrimination of all kind. I don't care if it's against straights or gays. It doesn't matter. There should be respect equally across the board. It doesn't matter what someone's sexual identity is. I don't care if they're gay, straight, or sexually confused. No one should be discriminated against. This is not about discrimination or authorizing it. What I'm talking about is where you have a community, a very large segment of the population, that wants to lower the age of consent just so they can have sex with children, with minors. And this is predominantly happening in the homosexual community. Here's the problem. Another big issue with lowering the age of consent, especially for homosexuals, is that you could possibly have more children that have AIDS. You could spread HIV/AIDS to them. If an adult homosexual male is wanting to have sex with little boys, do you think his mindset is that of safety? And that he's always going to wear a condom? And that if he has HIV/AIDS, he's actually going to tell the child, hey, I've got this disease? Because technically when someone has HIV/AIDS, by law, they are supposed to let whoever they're having sex with know they have a sexually transmitted disease. But is a child really going to know what HIV/AIDS is? And here's the thing. If a child contracts HIV/AIDS, are they going to know to go get tested for that? Are they going to open up to their parents, hey, I've become sexually active, I need to get tested? See, that's the thing. These adults are wanting to do adult sexual acts with minors. Minors do not know what to do in so many situations. Why? Because they're children. They can't vote, they can't drink, they can't own property. There's so many things that they cannot do. Why? Because they're children. Children need to be given a chance to grow up, but you have this homosexual community that doesn't honor or respect childhood. They don't honor or respect the life and the chastity and the sanctity of another person's sexual identity. They're so busy trying to convince everybody else that being gay is appropriate when it's not. And I've worked with homosexuals, whether male or female. Most of them are predominantly nice. But here's the thing. Whenever it comes to, the month of June or the LGBTQ agenda, these people, these homosexuals, they turn into crazy liberal nutbags. Because all they care about is their cause, their agenda. Well, here's the thing. That's not equality. Like, their agenda is not more important than my rights. And their agenda is not more important than the rights of a child. That's the problem. So just be aware that whatever rules, laws, and regulations you change or manipulate or throw out the window, you're taking away the authority of law enforcement to protect you and anyone else. Especially children, especially minors, especially women. Like, that's why this is so important. It's very important. And I say this as someone that lives in Oklahoma, where we have a very high rate of drugs. We have a very high rate of pornography. We have a very high rate of pedophiles. We have a very high incarceration rate of sexual offenders. Very high. Because there are a lot of people that, they commit their crimes in other states, and then they come to Oklahoma to hide out. Like, what I would tell law enforcement in other states, hey, if you want to try and find your perpetrator or your sick convict or whatever, try Oklahoma. There's a lot of them here that are not in prison yet. There are so many people that come to Oklahoma to escape the arm of the law. So just be aware of that. So I say this as someone that, I understand that we have rules, laws, and regulations, and some of them are heavy-handed, but most of our rules, laws, and regulations are not heavy-handed. They're there for a reason, because there was an issue that occurred, or that was not getting any better. And we had people around the turn of the century, and even going back to the founding of our country, they wanted what was best for our country, not what was worse, or terrible, or bad. Like, our founding fathers, they didn't found this country just so homosexual men could have sex with little boys. That's not what we were founded on. We were not founded on homosexuality. We were founded on liberty and freedom for all. But within liberty and freedom for all comes responsibility. In that you love and respect your neighbor. If you love and respect your neighbor, you're not going to be eyeballing their little child just so you can sodomize them. Like, there are certain types of behavior that are still inappropriate, immoral, and illegal, but whenever you have a community that gets millions of dollars for their agenda, which basically is what the month of June is. I mean, if you think about it, the LGBT community has been really smart. They've convinced people that they're the victim all the time, and they're not. Anybody can be a victim. Anybody can play their violin. And as I've said in times past, you want to play your violin? Go join an orchestra. At least get paid for whining and complaining. But here's the thing. The LGBT community was very smart in that they took over an entire month in the summer, when people tend to spend a lot of money in the summer because they're traveling. And so then they get retailers to donate a whole bunch of part of the sales of whatever they make in a profit, they get them to donate a bunch of it to the LGBTQ community. It's millions of dollars being funneled into the LGBTQ, XYZ, whatever community to fund their projects. Well, some of their projects are to change the laws. Another problem with this is these homosexuals are infiltrating women's and girls' sports. Like, they suck at being a guy, so they compete against girls and beat the crap out of them. Like, that's not fair. Like, that's dishonesty. Girls cannot compete against the physical strength and stamina of a guy, even if he's gay or feminine. But you'd be surprised how many people are okay with these homosexual transgenders being allowed to compete in female sports. I'm sorry, if you are not born a female, you're not female. Get over it. And if you don't know what you are sexually, look at your plumbing. It's very simple. You're either male or female. And you know what else is a lie about the LGBTQ community? There was a song or an album that came out by Lady Gaga. It was actually a really good album. Love her voice. I love her talent. It's amazing, but she used it for evil, not for good. She promoted the homosexual community, and it was called Born This Way. And here's the thing. Homosexuals, they cry out, well, I'm born this way. It's like, you are not born gay. That is a homosexual lifestyle that you choose, and you should not really choose it or be convinced to choose it until you are an adult. And even then, if you really wanted to live that way, you would not have to be convinced or indoctrinated. You would just want to do that on your own. It would be a choice. See, one of the biggest lies with the homosexual community is they try and convince people that they're born that way. And it's like, you were not born gay. You were either born male or female. That's it. So when you have these transgenders that are changing their gender and then saying, I'm born this way, that's a flat out lie, because they're having to permanently take, what's it called, those hormones. It's like hormone replacement therapy. They have to continue to take that in order to switch their body from being male to female or female to male. Which tells me you weren't born that way. If you're having to force your body to do something it's not naturally wanting to do. Because you're having to convince your glands and your cells to do something that they're not programmed to do. Because you're born one way, but you're transitioning into something that you were not born. So you have all these people that are trying to, and I shouldn't say all these people because it makes it seem like there's a lot. There are not a lot of transgender people. It's not as many as they say they are. The homosexual community is actually quite small. There are way more heterosexuals than there are homosexuals. Way more. Way more. But yet, they've got a pretty good grip on our society as a whole, making it seem like there's more of them than there really are, and there are not. And the reason why they're making it seem like there's more of them than there really are is they're trying to make it seem like, oh, this is a normal lifestyle, when it's not. If you have to take a pill every day to change your sex, you were not born that way. If you have to find a plastic surgeon that is willing to mutilate your body to change it into something else, you were not born that way. See, here's the thing. Whenever you are dealing with people that constantly lie to themselves, they are going to constantly lie to you. And then whenever they go after your rules, laws, and regulations, do you really think they're going to be making the right decisions? No, they are not, because they're constantly living a lie. Like they're psychologically not right. So, here's the thing. It starts out as baby steps in terms of what they're doing with their actions and their words, and then they take leaps and bounds in the really wrong direction. And part of that wrong direction is changing our rules, laws, and regulations. And now we're getting to what they really wanted. They've always wanted access to your children because they want to have sex with them. Lesbians, not so much a problem. Homosexual men, big problem. They target little boys and teenage boys all the time. All the time. And it's horrible. So my point is this, let me just say it. What's the point of having the Federal Bureau of Investigation having these laws if we're not going to enforce them and if we're not going to protect society? If we really value our country, if we really value our society, we will not allow infiltration of our laws and just let it be changed by really warped people that can't stand straight people. And I think that we're the problem when we're not. We are in this community together. That means our rights both matter. And we're equal. But what the homosexual community is trying to do, and they've been very successful at it, they're making it seem like they should have more rights than straight people. And that's not right. That creates inequality. That's not justice. And that's not liberty. That's not freedom. That's tyranny. And it's tyranny from within. And they've got millions of dollars being funneled to all these homosexual groups and agendas and organizations, and it's not right. It is not right. I wish more people would wake up to this because it's disturbing. I think one of the number one things that disturbs me is whenever I go into a bathroom and there's a man in there. Whether pretending to be a woman or he's transitioning to a woman, I don't care. He's not a woman. And these transgender people can be very aggressive to women in bathrooms. Why? Because they're trying to convince women that were born women that they are equal to us. They are not equal to us. We have equal rights in terms of the United States Constitution. But our sexes are not equal because they are a man, we are a woman. Like there have been times where I've seen a guy in the bathroom, I don't know if he was just trying to be a woman or trying to get access to little children in the bathroom, but I left the room and went to the family bathroom. That's what I do. And there was one time I had joined a gym, and I think I've mentioned this before, I couldn't tell who was what in our locker room, and it's the women's locker room. And it was so creepy, I was like, you know what, I would actually feel safer getting dressed in the men's locker room, because these transgender creeps are not going to the men's locker room, they're coming to the women's locker room, and they try and intimidate us all the time. And I don't want them looking at my body. Because I knew some guys at the gym, I said, hey, do you have any transgenders coming into the bathroom there? And they're like, no, they stay out of here. They're all going to the women's bathroom. I was like, I knew it. I was like, they're causing a problem in the women's bathroom, and it's creeping out the kids. See, they want access to your children. Whether it is to indoctrinate them or to have sex with them. Their mind is warped because it's a sexual agenda. That's a pedophile. That's a pervert. That's a very disturbed individual. And then they're trying to convince us that that's normal when it's not. So please recognize that our rules, laws, and regulations are there to protect all of us, but especially women and children. Because if your women and your children in your country are not protected, you've missed the mark already. And if women and children are not protected, what's the point of having an FBI? What's the point of having police departments? What's the point of having sheriff departments? Like, what's the point of having law enforcement agencies at all if women and children are no longer protected? It's an issue. Like, I never thought I would feel unsafe in a bathroom. Never. Never dawned on me. I also never thought the United States would allow men to go into a ladies' restroom. I would think the word on the door would be very clear who's allowed in and who is not. Lady or women. Like, I live in Oklahoma City. And I know when I'm out and about running my errands, and you'll say if I need to use the restroom, I know which restrooms to go use and which ones to not ever go into. Because of what has been going on with transgenderism in the homosexual community. Because if I don't feel safe somewhere, I don't shop there anymore, and I will never go in there and use their bathrooms. Bathrooms used to be a safe place to use the bathroom. It really used to. You know, bathrooms used to not be a political front. It used to not be a political arena. But it's like you can't go number 1 or number 2 anymore without someone trying to lecture you about their sexuality or glaring at you while you're washing your hands. That's what some of these guys do. They're trying to pretend they're women. They stand there and they glare at you because they know that you're a woman. And more than likely, they've seen you walk into the store with your boyfriend or your husband or your fiance, and guess what? They don't think you deserve to have that guy in your life because they want to have sex with him. See, again, it's a sexual agenda. If prostitution is wrong, the LGBTQ community agenda is wrong because it's a sexual agenda. It's not about sexual identity, it's their agenda. Because it's their agenda that they think should determine their sexual identity and other people's sexual identity. Your sexual identity is very obvious. It's when you're born. But now we have hospitals and medical professionals that whenever a baby is born, now they're asking the parents, do you want us to leave the sex of the baby blank on the birth certificate so it can be fluid, whatever that word means, so that you can decide what your child is going to be, or they can decide later in time whether or not they want to be male or female? That is unbelievable. I never thought the medical community would ever do that, but then again, I'm not surprised. Because if you can find a plastic surgeon to mutilate your body to be something else, you know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in terms of indoctrination and paying someone to give a certain type of opinion. And this is going on in the medical community. You know, used to, medical professionals were supposed to prevent children from being attacked, mutilated, or sexually abused. Well, now doctors are helping parents chemically castrate their little boys and possibly their little girls. You know, chemical castration was used to punish homosexuals, grown men, grown homosexual men. It was used to punish them for being homosexual. Now that was completely wrong to do that. Completely wrong. Because that's mutilating someone's body, and we know that it is wrong to chemically castrate someone because it's considered a punishment. Well, if it's considered a punishment and a violation of that person's body, then why are we allowing parents, really disturbed parents, to chemically castrate their children and change their sexual identity before they've even reached puberty? Like that child's sexual identity is being stolen from them by their parents and by the medical community that is enabling these really sick and disturbed parents to do horrible, sick things to their children. Why can't they just embrace their child the way they were born to be? The way that, you know, born this way. They were born a boy, let them be a boy. If they were born a girl, let them be a girl. See, it's one of those things, when you allow the wrong type of agenda to take hold of your society, the door gets kicked in by some really disturbed people, and then law enforcement, it's kind of like they don't know what to do to fight this stuff. Because you have court systems that are allowing parents to do these things, and then you have medical professionals such as doctors that they have a legal license to do some really sick things. How can law enforcement protect citizens if this stuff is being allowed in other arenas within our society? That's the problem. See, the LGBTQ community knew it could not go after law enforcement, but it could convince the medical community to do their bidding and their will or whatever. Now they're convincing parents to do really grotesque things to their children. That's really disturbing. You know what I don't get? I don't understand how, like when someone has foster kids, if they were to do these chemical castration things to their foster kids, they would be arrested and thrown in jail. But yet parents that either adopt or give birth to their children, they can do whatever they want to their children, to their bodies, to their mind, to their genitalia. And they don't go to jail. They should. They should permanently go to prison. And that child should be taken out of their family and be put with people that actually care about them and love them for who they were born to be, which is either a little boy or a little girl, and give them a chance to grow up and make that decision on their own. Like it's so grotesque and sick what some of these people do, but we are allowing it and we are tolerating it. See, I'll close with this. I think one of the biggest problems our country is facing right now, among other things, is we have really bad people in positions of power, like in Congress or senators or governors and things like that, that they are trying to change the rules, laws, and regulations to fit the very disturbing desires of certain segments of the population. And then they're trying to convince all voters that, hey, no, this is the right way to go. We really need to stand up for these people because these are the real victims. I got news for you. The LGBTQ community is not the victim. It's the people that they hurt that are the victims. Because the LGBTQ community is predominantly made up of adults that are going after children. It's really disturbing. And I'll say this, I don't have children yet, but if I did have children, if anything that has to deal with the LGBTQ community is being taught in schools, I would pull my kids out of school immediately and be like, we're either going to do homeschool, or we're going to go to a private school, or we're going to move. Because I don't care to have my children be indoctrinated into something that is morally wrong. And it also puts my child's safety at risk. That's how I would view it if I had children. And I also would not shop at stores where transgenders can just walk into any bathroom that they want. And there are stores that are strict about that. And I think they need to be strict. See, because here's the thing, the LGBTQ community, they think it's their job to put their rights above everybody else's rights. Well, that creates inequality. That's a civil liberty issue. That's a civil rights issue. But yet they claim that the Civil Rights Act is on their side. I got news for you, it's not. I guess they forgot, what the 1960s were like. Civil rights applies to everybody, not just the few. That was the whole point of civil rights. So I guess they need to read history. I guess they need to understand the law. And I guess they also need to focus on other things and not be so focused on children all the time. Because that's very disturbing. Because now we have a lot of books that are being published with the LGBTQ slant, and they're for children. I tell you what, if I owned a library, I would burn all those books that have a homosexual agenda. Because I look at it this way. You are enabling bad people to go after little children. And if you need evidence of that, go to any state prison and interview any of the sexual predators, especially pedophiles. Just interview them. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you. I'm sure they'd love to tell you about all their sexual conquests, especially if they've been caught or convicted. Now, if they're still lying to themselves in society and pretending that they're innocent, then you're not probably going to get a peep out of them. But I encourage you, contact them. They'll probably brag to you about all the stuff that they've done. That's the problem. They have no shame. They don't care who they hurt. It's the exact same thing in the LGBTQ community. And what's sad is that, how do you describe this? Most homosexuals are actually really nice. That's the thing. They're usually really nice people until they start thinking about their agenda. See, it's so bizarre. They give themselves permission to violate other people's rights. Well, the moment they do that, they are no longer a nice, kind person anymore because you see the true person. See, I have things that I support and things that I love, but I don't ever go overboard on it, so to speak. I don't ever use what I like or love to harm somebody else and to try and squash someone else's rights. That's not the point of standing up for something. It doesn't make sense, and it's not ethical or moral, and sometimes it's not legal to stand up for something over here, and whatever you're standing up for, that doesn't give you permission to violate someone else's rights in a different party or on a different platform. But that's what the LGBTQ community does all the time. All the time. And that tells me their agenda has a big problem. And we shouldn't support it. I think the more we allow this improper conduct to occur, the more difficult it's going to be to protect women and children, short-term and long-term. And let's say you're married. Let's say, you're straight, you're married, and let's say you're a guy listening to this. And you're like, well, my wife's never said anything about this. I got news for you. There's a lot of things that women do not talk about. A lot. And there are a great many things that wives do not tell their husbands because they're ashamed of it. And they're embarrassed by it. And sometimes they don't want to think about it. Just because someone doesn't talk about it doesn't mean it doesn't bother them. Just because someone doesn't stand up against something, that doesn't mean they're for it. Sometimes people mistakenly put their head in the sand because either A, they don't know what to do, or B, the subject matter is so grotesque, they don't want to deal with it or handle it. That's typically what happens. And it's very unfortunate. But unfortunately, now we have homosexuals that can legally marry. I could care less if they rent a hotel room. I could care less if they rent a car. They're grown adults, they're going to do what they're going to do. But the sacrament of marriage is just that. It's a sacrament. Meaning it belongs to God. And it's between one man and one woman. Not two men or two women, and not one man and a whole harem, which they have in Muslim countries and India, having multiple wives or something. But, we need to stick to what is good and true. And the homosexual community, they've convinced people that gay marriage is okay. It's not. They've convinced our society that they can adopt children. They should never adopt children. Never. They've convinced people that, children should be taught how to have sex. I think some sex ed classes start at age 5 or 6. You gotta be kidding me. That is sexualizing someone's childhood. That's what sexual predators do. We're not supposed to do that. And as a society, we're not supposed to allow that to happen. And we're not supposed to tolerate it. But we have. And it's as I've said before, if women and children are not protected, you got a big problem in your country. Big problem. I think the United States needs to wake up to this. Because it is an issue. Big time. But I will go ahead and end this podcast, and we will probably I don't know if we'll be able to finish up the FBI tomorrow, because there's quite a bit that they handle. Very interesting, very detailed, very in-depth. But just FYI, the FBI still does have to deal with sex trafficking, and sometimes that deals with children. So I encourage you, if you think that the FBI is okay with the homosexual agenda, if you know an FBI agent, ask them what they think about homosexual men wanting to lower the age of consent to minors for sex. I guarantee you, any and all FBI agents are going to be against that because they have seen the aftermath of that. And they have seen how horrible it is to little children. And it destroys families because they know what happened to their child. And they know that the perpetrator, the grown homosexual man, of course he's going to say it was consensual. I mean, it's just like frat guys that rape a girl. The roommate, of course, is going to support the guy and say, oh yeah, it was consensual. Why? Because they have that phrase, it's called bros before hoes. I hate that phrase, but we heard that all the time in college. That's why I didn't hardly ever date frat guys, because you couldn't trust them, because they could easily drug you. Easily. And then you knew they wouldn't do the right thing if something bad happened to you. It's the same thing in the homosexual community. They protect their own. They don't protect society. They don't really care about society. It's about them and their sexual agenda. If you know a law enforcement person, ask the police about this. Ask a cop that you know in your family what they think about homosexuals wanting to lower the age of consent. Because again, it's going to be very difficult to go after bad people. Here's another thing, I'll mention this before I close. If they change that law, you're opening the floodgate to international sex trade trafficking into our ports in the United States. That's already a problem. Girls getting kidnapped from other countries, with the promise of, oh, you're going to have a great life here in the United States. They get put in like some cargo ship crate thing or something, or they're in the belly of a ship, get brought over here into one of our ports in the United States, and then immediately they are used for sex and thrown away like a piece of garbage. Lowering the age of consent is a bad, bad thing. Bad. And it will make it very difficult for law enforcement to protect you and your children if that comes to pass, if it changes. It will be very difficult to fight that type of crime. Because we already have bad people moving here from international arenas, so to speak. That's already occurred and already is happening. Because, even bad people like to live nice. That's why they come to the United States. And here's another thing. Bad people love to piggyback on agendas that make it easier to commit crime. Where it's drug, sex, alcohol, pornography. That's an international problem as well. It's a big problem. And the United States used to be a country that stood up for what's right all the time. We're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. I think we can do a better job. I don't think all hope is lost, because I believe in always having hope. But we cannot align ourselves with people that have a really bad agenda and don't really value safety for women and children. They're targeting women and children. Not appropriate, not right. It's technically illegal, immoral, unlawful, and it's also unethical. And so, as I've said before, whatever you tolerate is what you allow to contaminate. So just be aware of that. But, we will do another episode of the FBI tomorrow. But until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.